Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'm Kamal Panchal. I'm a senior advisor at the Local Government Association. I lead on transport policy. Really pleased to say the LGA partnered up with the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, OZEV, and the LEVI support body to provide this hopefully timely webinar to support those councils in the process of applying for funding from the LEVI fund. As you know, the aim of the government's LEVI fund is to support local authorities in England to work with the charge point industry and to improve the rollout and commercialisation of local charging infrastructure. These public charge points will help residents who don't have off-street parking and need to charge electric vehicles. Today we've invited councillors and officers to join this webinar, which will have expert input from Aaron Berry from the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, Joanna from the LEVI support body, and Matthew Ling from Suffolk County Councils, one of the pilot LEVI fund councils. They will also do their best to answer any questions you have ahead of the deadline for submissions to the LEVI fund. We have allocated time at the end for questions, and Hugh Pickerel from the support body will also join the panel for this session. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function, and you'll find you can also upvote questions you like from the list. So I really encourage you to do that, and I will from time to time remind you to do that as well. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available via the LGA and also hopefully via the knowledge repository. So without further ado, I'd like to now invite Aaron Berry, who's the Deputy Head at Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, OZEV, to speak. So over to you, Aaron.
All right, I think I've got that to work. Kamal will shout at me if I haven't.
Yes, that's all good. I can see
Excellent. Thanks, Kamal. Well, afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon. Yeah, as per the introduction, my name's Aaron Berry. I'm one of the deputy heads of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, and I'm responsible in particular for local charging infrastructure. And I have been given 10 minutes to give you a quick overview of the LEVI fund scheme ahead of the further presentations. So just to set a little context in the first instance, you will be aware, no doubt, in 2021 we published the Transport Decarbonisation Plan and the Net Zero Strategy. The graph on the left, I think, illustrates the scale of the challenge that we have in the transport sector. We have really significant emissions. It is one of the most challenging sectors to decarbonise, and the net zero challenge is really significant to get down to zero in just a few decades. And because of the time it takes to change over the vehicle park, we need to get cracking with that yesterday. In terms of electric vehicles, they are a big part of the solution for addressing net zero. They are by no means the only part. We published an update on decarbonising transport 1 year on last year, and that illustrated sort of the range of policies we are adopting in order to decarbonise transport. Electrification of traffic of vehicles, of the passenger vehicle park in particular, but going beyond that into buses and HGVs and so on and so forth is a really key part of the challenge. Obviously, that is going to require some level of charge point infrastructure to support all those electric vehicles. We have made good progress thus far. We're at something like 42,000 or more than 42,000 charge points today, but they are servicing nearly 1 million electric vehicles. There are 735,000 pure battery electric vehicle cars on the road today, but if you include plug-in hybrids, it's already over 1 million. And you can see by the graph on the right there, the sort of the size of the curve, or the shape of the curve. It is rising exponentially over time. So the charge point infrastructure needs to rise to match that. We published our electric vehicle charging infrastructure strategy. Let's see, it's the year before last now, sort of setting out the overall vision for securing a good charging infrastructure infrastructure. I won't read through all of the aspects of the vision, but fundamentally it's about making sure that everyone can find and access reliable public charge points wherever they live. An important part of that is obviously local charging infrastructure, particularly for the third or so of households that don't have access to off-street parking. So the government are intervening across a range of areas where there are market failures in infrastructure, and it's worth saying that there are many areas where the market is actually delivering quite well, including in terms of rapid charging. Local rapid charging is being rolled out on a market-led basis in many parts of the country where there is demand for it. But there are areas where we do need to intervene, one of which is in local charging, and particularly on-street charging. But to achieve that vision, what does it look like? Well, from something like 42,000 charge points today, we need to get something like a tenfold increase over the course of the next 7 years. We estimate that somewhere between 280,000 and 720,000 charge points will be required in just 7 years. That is quite a range, and it depends on the type of charge points that are used and driver behaviors and battery ranges and a whole host of things. But whichever way you cut the cake, it's a huge and exponential rise needed in the level of charging infrastructure. And that's a real certainty in terms of that need over the period, albeit with quite a wide range in between it. The government has confirmed the introduction of a ZEV mandate from next year. That will secure the phase out of ICE-based, so typical petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030, where new sales will have to be electric or hybrid until 2035. So what sort of challenges have we got in the local space? Well, today we've got high regional disparity in deployment. That map on the right gives sort of an illustration of the range of deployment thus far, with sort of quite good concentration in London, but as you get out of London and the southeast, not too many charge points today. So our vision is to have a more equitable regional access for all drivers. And secondly, we have heard over the course of the last 5 years or so that local authorities lack the resource to plan, deliver infrastructure. So one of the things that we will do, and we are setting out to do, is to ensure that every local authority does have the resource to provide that infrastructure delivery. So you will be aware, hopefully, that on the 30th of March, just a couple of months ago now, as part of the government's Powering Up Britain Net Zero growth plan, we announced the launch of our LEVI scheme. So a very, very exciting point in the development of the funding. We have already launched the pilot last year and given a lot of money to local authorities in that space, and we've had the local on-street residential charging scheme, which many of you will be familiar with over the course of the last many years, more than 5 years, that has delivered almost 10,000 or so charge points in the pipeline. So there's a lot of funding in this space today. So what do we want to achieve with the LEVI fund? I think there are two key objectives. So one is delivering a step change in the scale of deployment of primarily low power on-street charging infrastructure across England. So scale is really important. If you think we need to get something like a tenfold increase over the course of the next 7 years, it's not about being, one or two charge points here and there in the odd car park. It's about deploying thousands and hundreds and thousands of charge points over the course of the next sort of 3-4 years. And the second point is accelerating the commercialization of an investment in the local charging infrastructure. So while we have quite a lot of capital funding to deploy in this space over the course of the next couple of years, there's an expectation that this is not an area that we will be or need to be subsidizing in the long term. It's an area that we can stimulate now, and if we get it right, we can commercialize the sector so that effectively the private sector are investing in that infrastructure in public spaces without the need for subsidy. So a better deal for taxpayers and a better deal for residents if we get it right. There are 3 aspects to the LEVI fund. So we have the capital funding, we have the capability funding, which has already been dispersed to local authorities, with more planned over the course of the next 2 years. And thirdly, the provision of tools, training and sharing of best practice via the LEVI support body, more of which you will hear about later. So just a quick overview of the application process. We have launched it as of 30th of March, and the first step is to provide an expression of interest from your local authority by the 26th of May. So we are coming up to that deadline. It is an expression of interest in the funding. It is there to gather initial intelligence to inform the support body engagement, to assess the budget implications, and fundamentally to determine which tranche local authorities will need to go in. We have fixed capital budgets over the course of the next couple of years, so we need to allocate authorities into either tranche 1 or tranche 2 of the funding. That's the primary purpose of that initial step. We're not expecting fully formed proposals. That's not what it's about. The main step of the funding of the application process is the second one. So the application window with a final deadline of 17th of November, but I'd emphasize that that's a final deadline, so you can apply earlier if you're ready to do so. And the critical point there is having a tender document in place, so how you will go out to the market and to apply with a fully formed idea and business case. That's a point at which most of the funding will be allocated and dispersed to local authorities, and that does have to happen in year for tranche 1 applicants. And the final point of the application process, stage 3, is the final contract submission, which will need to be done by summer of 2024 for the first round of tranche 1 applicants. And at that stage, the final 10% of funding will be released. So what makes a good LEVI bid? Well, one that is in line with the LEVI objectives, so a strong rationale for charge point locations, scale deployment and value for money being really key. A commercial proposition, so private investment, we are looking to really to really commercialize the sector and make it stand on its own 2 feet. So having something that's in line with the funding objectives, and competitive tenders, so we can really make the market work. Good project planning with good defined KPIs, etc., and strong engagement with the private sector, the DNO, and market engagement. So I think we're running out of time here slightly. So the LEVI scope and conditions provide quite a flexible framework. So we've tried to take a much less prescriptive approach than we had in our existing scheme, and the onus is on local authorities to meet the criteria, but it's very flexible. So we're happy to work with local authorities to find a strategy that works for you, and the LEVI support body are on hand to help with applications to meet the objectives. So lots of flexibility. So for example, where AUKS would only allow slower on-street charge points, there is flexibility for some rapid charge points in the LEVI fund, just as an example. Stage 1, this expression of interest, I mean, they will be marked fairly shortly, but we have clear criteria to assess those applications. All of this is available online. And likewise with the application assessment at stage 2. So we've set out the assessment criteria. This is just an illustration of one of the key criteria, which is around value for money and additionality. Fundamentally, we are looking in particular for approaches to procurement that would maximize the charging provision secured in the areas of need for the subsidy available. So this is really about scale. That is what we are after here, scale of charging infrastructure. Now, I've whizzed through all of this. There is a lot of detail available online, so I do urge you to spend half an hour or so looking through the fairly extensive slide pack available that will explain the scheme and the criteria and the conditions of funding, etc., etc. And if the answers aren't in there, as Kamal said earlier, we are happy to take questions and provide clarity. I think I won't dwell on the support available because there'll be more on this shortly, just as such to say that there is a lot of support and we would very much urge you to take advantage of it. So we have commercial expertise, we have technical expertise, and a lot of experience working with local authorities that the Energy Savings Trust have developed over time through operation of the AUX scheme. So do please take advantage of that. In terms of the next steps, obviously the application window for tranche 1 or for the expressions of interest is 26th of May. So if you haven't got that expression of interest in yet, hopefully it's well developed. It is light touch. It doesn't need an awful lot. So if you don't have an awful lot of information to input into it, that's completely fine. But do please get your expressions of interest in by the deadline. I won't go through all these deadlines, but the slides will be available after the presentation, so you can look at them at your leisure. And finally, just to say that the on-street residential charge point scheme is still available this next financial year, but we've changed it to be in line with the LEVI fund. The rules for the scheme are outlined here. The applications will open for that fairly shortly. We are working up the final guidance for it for this year, but it has changed from last year, so do please check out the new rules before applying. And I think I am slightly over time now, so I will stop there, but I think there will be an opportunity for questions later, and you can always email the address here for any further questions. So thank you very much.
Great, Aaron. Thanks very much for that. Yes, there's no shortage of questions I can see in the Q&A box, so we'll pick those up later on. Joanna, can we hand over to you, please, and you'll provide some advice on what makes a good expression of interest. So over to you, Joanna. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kamal. My name is Joanna Wanat. I'm the Assistant Program Manager at Energy Saving Trust in the EV Grants team, administering the LEVI fund as part of the support body. And you'll spend the next 15 minutes with me. So the topic of this section of the webinar is what makes an excellent EOI. The aim is to support you in compiling the EOI response and give an overview of what you need to consider for each tranche. So I will start with a quick reminder of the overall LEVI application process and key dates that you need to have in mind. I will also cover the structure of the expression of interest, and then we will jump into markers of excellence for the applications and the particular criteria we will be looking at while scoring the application. Okay, so I think Aaron covered the application process already, so I won't dwell on that. But yeah, the overall LEVI application process consists of 3 stages. First is the expression of interest, which the deadline for submission for both the capital fund expression of interest and capability fund pro forma is 26th of May. Then there is some period of time for the support body and also to review the expression of interest and give feedback to the council that might need support to get the application ready for their preferred tranche. The second stage is application and criteria compliance, and the last one is contract review. Okay, so the structure of the EOI. The expression of interest intended purpose is to determine which tranches local authorities will be in, what support might they require, and in which areas. So for that reason, it contains all the essential information that support body needs to understand how prepared the local authorities are, how experienced they are, what might be the challenges that they face. And the first section asks for information regarding EV strategy, the strategic fit. In this section, you specify whether you have a dedicated local EV charging strategy, when was it published, and provide a summary of it, or that you are currently developing one, or you don't have one and you're not yet preparing one. Second section, commercial case, covers questions around existing contracts, suppliers and council's preferred commercial arrangements at this stage. So whether you have preference for own and operate, for example, public-private commercial partnership, joint venture, or land lease. Third section, economic case, asks for information on value for money and additionality. So here you include information on number of charge points, technology types, any supporting technology to reduce overall costs, such as energy generation or storage. This is the section where we expect to see a strong evidence of how the costs of your projects are competitive, or a strong rationale for why they might be higher. And the fourth section, existing contract. So LEVI is all about open competitive procurement. We want to ensure that market operators compete for LEVI supported contracts to maximize charging capacity. Existing contracts, even where they were openly competed, are unlikely to achieve that. However, this is judged on a case-by-case basis. And in fifth section, the preferred tranche, you're expected to stage which funding would you like to apply for, which outline your current stage of project development and specify any areas that you require support on. And overall, at this stage, it is not expected that all applicants will know all the details. We understand that figures surrounding charge point numbers and exact amount of funding might change from stage 1 to stage 2, but we definitely encourage local authorities to make their best estimates based on all available resources, strategies, and modeling tools, such as the Nevis Knowledge Repository platform developed by Senex. And now we'll look at markers of excellence. So the key aspects to consider if you're looking to progress your application to tranche 1 are firstly, scale of the project. So we ask to consider other sources of funding to scale the project, inclusive of private investment, local authority, prudential borrowing, and other public funding sources. Collaboration with other tier 1 authorities is also encouraged to help scale the project. And the next thing to consider is competitive procurement and strong level of private investment. So like I mentioned before, the preference for the openly competed procurement, so that market operators compete with each other for LEVI supported contracts. And the next thing, the last thing is cross subsidy. So we understand that attracting private investment is very much about striking the balance between commercially viable sites and less commercially viable sites. So that's why we encourage the cross subsidization and portfolio approach of including a mix of different sites to leverage the private sector investment. And there is a level of flexibility allowed within the approach. We understand that every local authority is in a different place in terms of EV infrastructure. We also acknowledge that local authorities have the understanding of unique local EV landscapes in their regions and are very well placed to make their own decisions on what will work well in their region and what are the local needs. Okay. And now criteria for assigning local authorities to tranche 1. So for tranche 1 application, the project needs to meet all or most of the LEVI criteria. And if there are any concerns, they can be mitigated within the tranche 1 timescales, so before November 2023. And on the next slide, there is a bit more detail. So the main criteria broken down into sections of the EOI look like this. Tranche 1 expression of interest ideally needs to have a well-presented, clear signed off EV strategy for each local authority. You should attach that document to the submission. The expression of interest should have detailed information or collaboration with constituent tier 2 authorities and other authorities involved in the collaborative bid. Preferred commercial arrangement should be provided, including details on key terms, procurement routes, how it aligns with OZEV heads of terms. There needs to be consideration of different options and relevant evidence to support your preferred approach. You should propose the minimum number of charge points and show that they're well considered and align with LEVI objectives. And you should have plans to go to competitive tender. And now a bit about tranche 2. So if the LEVI objectives are not fully met in the OI, there are major concerns about the project that are unlikely to get resolved before November 2023. And overall, the Council doesn't seem ready to get to the level of detail required by November 2023. It's then assigned to Tranche 2. So again, broken down into sections, Tranche 2 expression of interest would be characterized by lack of EV strategy, major challenges in collaboration between local authorities, no consideration of different commercial arrangements, unknown key terms or procurement routes, poor alignment with LEVI objectives, and principles in the OZEV heads of terms, poorly considered number of charge points, no evidence of attempts to maximize private investment and value for money, lack of consideration of other sources of funding, and an existing contract that the authority wants to use for LEVI that has got no clear mitigations to ensure value for money. And here is just a summary slide with criteria put together in a table for comparison between Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. I appreciate that it's quite a lot of information, so the slides will be available after the webinar, and you can have a closer look at those. Yeah, I just thought it might be useful to see those criteria side by side when you're reviewing the slides. Okay, and here's the last slide with some of the most recent updates. So in your LEVI application, you should use the charge point power output definitions that you can see on the slide. The second update is regarding the contactless payment. So all charge points installed through LEVI and ORGs should have contactless payment at new charge points that are kilowatts, 8 kilowatts and above, and new and existing rapids that are 50 kilowatts and above. And on that note, I will hand over to Matthew from Suffolk County Council. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So I just want to bring us down to earth a bit in terms of what we are doing in Suffolk and how we are working with the pilot LEVI funding, and give you a sense of some of the lessons that we've learned. I thought to start off with, I'll just introduce you to where Suffolk is, because I know that England is a big country and not everybody knows about the eastern part of England, because you come here on purpose. You don't come here by accident. We are a rural county. We have a mixture of some urban centres, but predominantly there's lots of fields and lots of people who are distributed over a broad area. So we have a different challenge than an urban, largely built up area to actually address, and we need to look at that carefully. Again, we need to look at the whole picture of what we're trying to do. I was at the Ipswich Felixstowe historic rally this last weekend, and I noticed this, I think it's 1929, it might be Elvis, I think, on the left-hand side of the picture. And it made me realise that when this car came out, the infrastructure for petrol was not actually very good. And so they had to take their cans of petrol with them just in case there wasn't a filling station. And I thought, actually, that replicates a bit where we are now in terms of EV provision and infrastructure provision, in that we can't always guarantee that where we go, we'll be able to actually recharge. The middle image is just the contrast. So that's my old Morris van. I know that if that was built today, it would be electric. That's just what is happening. That's just how and the right thing to do. But in the background, you see our FastNed ultra rapid charging station on one of our park and ride. Yeah. Sorry,
we haven't got your slides up yet. We can't see them. Is that possible?
Can you not?
No.
Oh, I can see them. You can't. Let me start again then. Shall I do that? Yeah. My apologies for that. I was getting so enthusiastic about this. Right. Okay. I won't spend too long. That is where Suffolk is. You know now. Left-hand side, infrastructure was not always right for ICE vehicles, and we know that it's better now. Middle one, that's the FastNed station we've just put in place, one of our park and ride ones. The financial model there is one where we lease the land, FastNed pay a lease for it, and we then also get a slight revenue from that as well. But the contrast is clearly there. We are where we are, but we also need to know where we are going. So that's my best image of a autonomous vehicle, autonomous driving, a remote control car. Do we know where we're going? And making sure we have infrastructure that is built for the future is just so important. And I will come back to that because that's one of the lessons we've learned. Plug in Suffolk was the UK's first open access standard county-wide charging network, and we've put in place 100 charging points across Suffolk in community locations. We were the ones that said you need to have tap and pay. You need to have contactless, because we think that's what people want. And listening to your audience, we think, is clearly really important. So the elements of why we go for a community hub model in the work we have done so far is because we believe that it gives a better charging infrastructure overall. We've already heard about the need to make sure that no one is left behind. In Suffolk, when broadband came online, we found there was many rural populations that didn't have access to broadband. And there was a huge amount of additional funding that had to be put in place in order to enable that to take place. We don't want that to happen with EV. We're ahead of the game enough to say we want to make sure that everyone has access to EV infrastructure. We want to make sure people see it there to give them confidence to see EVs driving around and to know that it does work. We also want to make sure we improve the local economy. We want to make sure that people get the most benefit from the latest technology. We want to give ownership of our system to the local community groups so that they value it and so they can actually champion it in their own areas. We also want to, where possible, create revenue streams for them, although at the moment, obviously, that's low uptake. And we also want to make sure that we influence future decisions and get the benefits from those. So our rural charging hubs that we put in place are very much designed as a community asset. Now that right-hand picture there typifies many of our populated areas in Suffolk. Many villages have streets with houses which open straight onto the streets. This is not like your terrace houses in an urban area, but it's not dissimilar. Where do they park? How do they charge? How can we provide that provision? We also want to make sure everything has been accessible. So the top left gives you a little bit of an image of making sure we design it right. Enough space. Where is the charger? What's the height of it? How do we pay? Is it easy to read? Are the instructions there? We do want to make sure it's customer focused. And we want to make sure it's close to the user. There's no point having provision for people without off-street parking if they've got to walk miles to where they're going. So to have them in community assets, have community hubs, it gives real community benefits, and it's got to be easy to use. We know what the regulations are going to say in terms of no need to have contactless for 7 kilowatt chargers. To be honest, in Suffolk, we disagree. We think most of our customers say, give us contactless. That's what we want. And I think it's important to listen to the customer as we go through this. Now, the other thing I notice, and the things one of our learning, is that often you hear a lot of bad stories. And we need to make sure that we are champions of this rather than talking about the bad stories. But having said that, here are some bad stories. It needs to work. You know, coming back from Durham the other week for the LEVI seminar, we came to one service station, Cambridge. You can look up to see who supplies the charge points there. It was chucking it down with rain. We got out, we used our Shell card to pay for the charging session. Oh, didn't work. We couldn't park in the space because it was blocked. We then had to find the right app. We then had to find the right credit card. And all the time, the rain was chucking it down at 10:30. There was no cover. Why was that? I don't know any petrol station where there's no covering. Maybe you do. The need to download multiple apps, and that's the screen from my phone, is horrendous. The other thing is we don't want any surprises. So on the right-hand side, I was testing out a site recently, and it wouldn't work on the contactless. So I thought I'll use the app. I ended up with, I think, 10 pre-authorization payments, which was a nightmare. I've now got, I think, £600 or £700 of finance on my current account I can't spend because of the pre-authorization. It's got to work. Customers won't use this if it doesn't. I've mentioned accessibility, location. You need to know your location. You need to know your area. You need to know where things need to be. You also need to know that when things go wrong, they can get the support they need. You need to have a 24/7 number to get them to call so that if things go wrong, they can sort it. If you're going to a place where you're going to charge overnight and you turn up at 10 o'clock in the evening and it's only an office hours customer service line, how are you going to cope with that? Come back. From a reputational point of view, you can't work with it. Some of the other lessons we've learned is the need to make sure you check and manage the hardware. You need to make sure it's got annual safety checks. You need to know who pays for that maintenance. You need to know how quickly that support happens. You also need to make sure that people know how to find it. We've all seen some charge points put in areas which are poorly lit, poorly accessible, no signage to find them. So you need to have that visibility on Google, Apple, and ZapMap. It's just a given. The other thing is it's hardware and software. For us, we believe that we need to have visibility of the charging network so we can understand where the load is, where the demand is, and the usage is, where the failures are. But I mentioned about needing to look forward. Over the 3 years we've been putting in community hub charging stations, we've had 3 generations of hardware and we've had multiple versions of software. As we go forward, who's going to pay for that? How do you build in the finance to make sure that you don't have something which is redundant? Really, really important. And in terms of the way you might do that, clearly in terms of implementing it, there's a whole lot of project planning that needs to go on. Our LEVI pilot is built on our success. We're working collaboratively with all our local authorities and commercial partners. We need to address the rural and urban problems. How do we deal with multiple terrace streets where there is no off-street parking, where there's already residence parking schemes in place? How do we deal with the policies of cables over pavements? How do we deal with the fact that, for instance, in Suffolk, all our streetlights have been put to the back of the pavements because we don't want those to be obstacles? There's a lot of practical stuff, a lot of policy stuff. You need to talk to your highways people. You need to get them on board. Our plan is to install a significant number of more sites, both urban and rural. We like our community ownership model. We think it gives real merit to what we do. It gives greater engagement. It gives them the opportunity to actually go and do things. And we also think that we need to work commercially as well. So my sort of table of things we need to do. We move between often range anxiety, change anxiety, charge anxiety, and climate anxiety. We need to understand the people we're with. We need to understand how they work, how they don't work. We need to look at the framework. Do we do it in-house or do we do it in procurement in terms of framework stuff? What's the best way of doing that? We've used different models. We will continue to use different models. I think it's a mixed mode provision. It's a mixed mode provision of the type of network we're going to put in place. I'm always convinced that you need to have people working on this who are enthusiastic about this. This is not about getting the people in your organization who just want to be put out to grass for the last couple of years of their lives. This is about people who are dedicated, committed. This is about people who've actually driven EVs, who understand why you do it. This is also about understanding the politics as well. Suffolk has changed a lot over the last few months, as many of you know. We need to understand what's going on and why it's going on. And we need to collaborate. We need to gain the allies. We need to work out who will work with us and actually work with it. And clearly the infrastructure issues of where is the power, really, really important. Where do we want to be in Suffolk? We want to go from what is really better to best. We want to understand what we need to put in place in the future. We do need a portfolio of charge point infrastructure, and that's what we're trying to address through our EV infrastructure strategy. We want to make sure that we encompass the whole lot: fast, rapid, ultra rapid, inductive. What do we do about that? Is that the taxi answer? Autonomous vehicles. We need to work on our public commercial. We've just, as part of our work, got 2 ultra rapid stations in place. We're looking at a 3rd one in the north of the county. We're working with our districts and boroughs, and we're already seeing significant implementation over the last few months is going to happen. But we also think that it's got to be a wide network that is regional, that's transparent, accessible. People have got to be at the center for their mobility, their health, and their accessibility. That's my whistle-stop tour through Suffolk and our plugged-in approach. Happy to answer some questions. We're looking forward to this. We think it's such an exciting journey we're on, and we really want to be involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That's excellent. Okay, let's not waste any time because there's plenty of questions there. Let me kick off with the first couple. So the first one is question on why isn't there more of a focus on rapid chargers? So I'm not sure who wants to pick that up. Is that one for Aaron?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So we are focused on local charging and for the needs of residents without access to off-street parking. And as a rule, we would like that access to be sort of slower powered on street for the most part where it is possible. And obviously there are local circumstances where that may not work in a particular local area, but the benefits of sort of the on-street model is that it's slower and it's overnight, so residents start their day with a fully charged vehicle. It's more akin to what most people do today, which is to charge at home overnight in their driveway. So it's typically cheaper than going to a rapid charger and more a greater ease of access, provided the charger is available. But there is flexibility within the scheme for alternative options, for some support for rapid chargers as well.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Next question. I think I'll sort of join these two together. Well, I'll ask them both. So one is, how about charge points at railway station car parks and park and ride sites? And this is a related question, I think. Can the fund be used in a hub in a park or open space away from residential areas? So is that for you, Aaron, or is that for...
So again, the conditions of funding are set out on the website, and the primary focus of the project needs to be residents without access to off-street parking, so local charge points. There is within the project scope to include things like car clubs, for example, like taxi hubs, like park and ride as part of an overall project. But the focus of the project itself should primarily be for residents without access to off-street parking. So the short answer is it could form part of the project.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Next question. What would happen if tranche 1 over or underspends? Suspect there's another one for you, Aaron.
It is. So it is a good question and it's very pertinent. So we have fixed budgets in year. We need to allocate the funding within the year, which is why the primary purpose of this expression of interest stage is to understand which tranche local authorities want to go into, so that we can allocate them into a tranche and allocate the funding. If we underspend, we lose the money. And that means that ultimately local authorities lose the money. It goes back to treasury coffers. We won't overspend, quite simply. We would allocate the funding slightly after the end of the financial year is how we would deal with that. But that would be a nice position to be in. I think you're on mute. You muted yourself.
I'm on mute. Schoolboy error. Okay, so next question is, when is the deadline for tranche 2? And like in tranche 1, can applications be submitted at any time before the deadline?
Yeah, so on the deadlines, there's a sort of related question in the chat around the deadline for EOIs, and does everyone have to get their EOIs in? So yes is the answer to that. Doesn't matter how little or much information you have, get your EOI in by the deadline, please. That's all you need to do is say, yes, we're interested in having this funding. We don't have a strategy. If that's the case, we don't know how many charge points we're going to have, etc., etc. That's completely fine. That gives us an indication that you're probably tranche 2. So please do fill it in. The deadline for tranche 2 applications has not been determined yet. We'll work that out as soon as we can. It is likely to be earlier in the year than for tranche 1 applications, because again we need to allocate the funding by the end of the next financial year, so 24-25. We need to allocate that funding by April 2025, which effectively means that contracts need to be signed by then to release the final 10%.
Excellent. Does the bid need to include that the local distribution network have sufficient capacity to deliver this?
No, and particularly for the EOI stage, but you should certainly be contacting your DNO with your plans for the funding. They need to understand it's coming.
Okay. Well, coming through very thick and fast. And apologies, Aaron, they seem to be mostly directed at yourself. But anyway, next question. Can you please confirm if leveraging private sector funding is essential for LEVI applicants, and if there is a minimum percentage of private contribution?
Okay, so the second question is easier, that there is no minimum percentage. In terms of leveraging other funding, it would include, for example, UKIB loans. So it's not, you're not purely talking about absolutely private finance, but the goal of the scheme is to really leverage scale. And if the funding is used sort of as 100% grant funding, we will not get the scale we need, and we won't be creating that sort of sustainable future for charge point rollout. That's why this is so important. This will not be a subsidized area into the long term. So we are open to lots of different sorts of solutions. So as we were saying earlier, for those local authorities that want to do own and operate, where there is going to be less sort of private funding, most obviously, it's those opportunities. If you want to do that, we would urge you to look to leverage further funding, such as through UKIB, so you're using the subsidy effectively and you're getting the scale that we're looking for.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, so we've already gone through a competitive tender process to appoint a contractor to install EV charge points on street. So the question is, will this be considered a good thing when applying for LEVI funding, or will it count against the council who's done this?
So the short answer is that we are looking to use the LEVI funding directly to go out to procurement after stage 2. So that's another question in the chat. So after the application has been agreed, that is the ideal point of procurement. After the funding has been agreed and you go to the market with the funding and get the maximum charging infrastructure that suits your local authority's needs for the funding available. So you're testing the market. If you have already gone out to procurement, on what terms have you gone out? How do you know you've got the best deal for the subsidy available? Very often what's happening at the moment is that the existing subsidy is getting baked in to the bids that the CPOs are putting in, so based on AUKs very often. So miraculously it's all 60% public funding and the CPOs pick up the 40%. So we're really looking to leverage the market here, and it's quite difficult to do that if you're not going to the market with a clear offer. So the strong preference is to go out to procurement after the application has been agreed on a competitive basis with the subsidy available, and try and maximize the charging infrastructure, putting it to the market. But we will consider all applications on a case-by-case basis, and it may be the case that part of an application could use an existing procurement.
Thank you, Aaron, for that. So just a question, just to go back to the point, and I'm not sure whether you've covered it, and it might be worth Matthew coming on this one. So a question is asked, one street on my patch, the average household car ownership is 4. Wow. Is slower charging really appropriate? Have we considered average household car ownership? So I just wonder whether, well, who wanted to come in on that, but Matthew, it might be useful to share your experiences from Suffolk when you're faced with those sorts of circumstances.
Yeah, so we've done some analysis looking at our various districts, some of our super output areas in terms of postcodes, and the ownership varies hugely across Suffolk. So we do have some areas where it's got very high ownership and some very low, and some of that is by virtue of the fact that in rural areas the provision of alternative transport is low, so people need to have their own personal vehicles. I think, to me, it comes back a little bit to the behavioural change stuff as well, in terms of what people expect and what you need. The presumption that you need to have your car charged up every night clearly is a fallacy, unless you are doing huge numbers of miles. So the concept of helping people understand how often they need to charge and when they need to charge, as I think is really important, and getting people to understand the balance of that. And some of that is not really understood until you actually have a vehicle and see what it's like. So I think in an urban area where you have allocated parking, it can be a real challenge. If you've got a terrace house where you've got 3 or 4 cars ownership, you've already got a problem. And that brings down to the fact you're trying to reduce the modal dependence on vehicles as well. You have to look at your areas, you have to look at your demand, you have to look at the provision, which is why sometimes a car park based overnight charging provision in proximity to someone who hasn't got off-street parking may well be the best for a neighbourhood. So I think it's very much focusing on what the needs are, what the requirements are, and then working on that. It may be, if you've got a very dense area with huge car ownership, that actually rapids are the way you need to do it. But I think to understand the people and working with those in some sort of education, behavioural side of things is also an important aspect of this. It's not just about the technology, although the technology is really fun, as everyone knows.
Thanks, Matthew. I've got another question for yourself. Could you tell us more about Suffolk's community ownership model, please?
Sure. So what we've done is we've gone out to our community groups, our parish halls, our community associations, and said to them, are you interested in a scheme? Now, we've targeted that on to make sure we get the rural distribution, to make sure we're not just focusing on one area. And we said, are you interested in having charge points? These are the conditions. One is that you will be responsible for the ongoing maintenance and running costs, but you may get an income from that. You need to keep it open for 24 hours a day so that you can have people parking there overnight, so they can charge. The majority of those community locations are ones where there's people without off-road parking. So again, it really ticks a positive box in terms of the LEVI stuff. We do, to date, we put in the infrastructure, we made sure everything's right, and we've done a handover pack, and then they've owned it and they take it on. Again, the people who know their communities best in a rural area are the communities. It's not us as a county council, it's not us as representing district councils, it's the local people. So if they have a resource, just as whether it's a playing field, whether it's a space for meeting, they will want to get maximum benefit out of that. So to us, it makes sense to empower those local authorities, empower those local community groups to actually take it on and maximize the benefit to them. You're on mute, Kamal.
Apologies. Thank you for that. Okay, so there's a practical question here around, and it comes up from time to time, and it's apologies, it's not directly related to LEVI, but I think because of the fact it keeps coming up time to time, it's just around cables across the footpath. And I just wonder whether, I don't know whether the LEVI fund helps address that at all, or whether, Matthew, you've got a solution or a response to that, but it is a question that keeps coming up.
We could probably both answer that one. Maybe if I answer the sort of what the LEVI will do in the first instance, and Matthew can come in with the practical experience. So, and fundamentally, we're trying to get away from that, right? So we don't want cables generally strewn across pathways, and if you've got good public charging infrastructure available, people won't need to do that. So there are a variety of solutions. Obviously, sort of the lamppost charging and the bollard charging. Gullies are one way of having that access to a private charge point on a house where the sort of on-street parking is accessible for the resident, that is an option under the LEVI fund, where the local authority approves of that sort of process, so that there are options out there. Fundamentally, we want to get away absolutely from cables running across footpaths, which could present a trip hazard. But I'll hand over to Matthew for some local experience.
So we've not solved this one yet. You need to talk to your highways people who have responsibility for those pavements. As I said, in Suffolk, our lampposts have been moved to the rear of the streets scene mainly. So if we put in charging at the curbside, we've got to look at gullies, we've got to look at perhaps at build outs, we've got to look at bollards and all those things. And it's quite a challenge to get those to work. I think if you go through some of the LEVI support work, and Hugh may want to pull on this, there's been a lot of examples at the roadshows about different systems that are used. I was down at Fully Charged in Farnborough the other week, and they had a number of systems on display there. So Fully Charged also have a session, I think, at Harrogate next week. So if you're in the north of England, to go and see and talk and look to see it, whether it's pop-up systems or whether it's Lancers or whatever, there's a lot of solutions there. I think there's also, as I say, need to look at the highway stuff. We do drop curbs in local authorities, and we have provision there for people to pay a certain amount of money to have permission to drop the curb. They use approved suppliers. The challenge that I'm seeing and hearing about is who pays for the ongoing maintenance. And it also is a socioeconomic thing as well. If it's a rented property, is the rental person, the tenant, going to pay for a channel to be put in and then move? And then who pays for the maintenance after that? So I know there's a number of models around. I think Oxford have done some work, Norwich have done some work, or Norfolk, and I think there's a number of other examples. But how do you pay for it? How do you maintain it? Do you have to put it back to how it was if you move house? And the liability of it, the trip hazard is clearly a significant impact here, which I think is definitely what we're trying to avoid. There is a solution. We're working on it, and I know others are further ahead. So Hugh may know other people who are already sorted on this, I hope.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We saw throughout the pilot scheme, we saw a number of really successful applications that included gullies and other different types of charging infrastructure. So absolutely, more than happy to put anyone in touch with those and to signpost where necessary. But yeah, as Matthew touched on, the LEVI roadshows, we try to focus on a type of infrastructure for each roadshow. I think the first one was on gullies. The one previously we've just had in Durham was on flash fitting charge points, so charge points that kind of reappear from the ground as if by magic. The next one will be looking at charge point sharing. So it's a bit of a shameless plug, but the next roadshow coming up in Guildford. So yeah, definitely recommend coming along to that. All of the content is available online on the knowledge repository. It's recorded. Charge point providers give a sort of 5-minute pitch, if you will. So it's really useful, really interesting stuff. But yeah, happy to signpost where projects are kind of successfully deploying this infrastructure.
Brilliant, great. So just going back to the LEVI fund, it seems there's still a little bit of confusion there, and then the question is, could the LEVI fund charge points in parish council car parks for community charging where residents without access get priority?
I can come in on that one. So the simple answer is yes, right? So there are relatively few red lines in the LEVI fund. There is an awful lot of flexibility for local authorities to come up with plans that suit their particular circumstances. So the relevant conditions around the priority users for the projects, it needs to focus on those without access to off-street parking, where the sort of suitable areas are for them to be able to charge. And if a parish council car park is the appropriate answer in a particular area, then that is fine as part of the project. Likewise for some rapid chargers, we talked about rapid charging hubs, that is also an option. The majority of funding needs to be on lower on-street charging infrastructure. That's one of the red lines, but there is a lot of flexibility within the fund to suit particular local circumstances.
Thank you. I think, Aaron, you may have answered this already, but you might want to expand. So we've got a question here. Could this funding be available to invest in charging for car clubs, for example, zip cars, so that this would help reduce the need for car ownership?
So car clubs are within scope of the fund. I mean, and again, the focus. Think about who we're trying to service here. It's residents without access to off-street parking, and in some areas, car clubs are part of the sort of local authorities' strategy for decarbonisation. So encouraging car clubs is part of that, and obviously the car clubs cars want to be zero emission. So absolutely yes, that can be part of a project.
Okay, brilliant. And here's a question around the marketplace. So the question is that the market can be quite confusing. We have a number of offers that say they can install and operate for free, rent the space from councils and keep the income. Is this model too good to be true?
So we've done quite a lot of work in this space, and we've developed with our procurement forum, the support body, some heads of terms which we would urge you to look at in terms of thinking about the sort of contracts that make sense to enter. I think you do need to be careful about fully funded offers, but by all means read the terms available. I mean, what we are suggesting is that you go out to the market with the LEVI fund in line with the heads of terms and see what comes back, because I think the offers from charge point operators will vary quite widely. I think the sorts of things that you need to look out for, I think, with the fully funded is quite how long are you tied in for, what happens at the end of the contract, are they cherry picking the really sort of commercial areas, leaving you to have to heavily subsidize the more challenging areas. And what we really want is really good comprehensive coverage, and that will, we think, require a degree of subsidy overall. So what we would really like for local authorities to do is to take the funding and go to the market on competitive, on sort of good, strong commercial terms and see what comes back.
Thank you, Aaron. Just got a question about the role of district councils in this, and I think a point of clarification as to whether district boroughs can apply for funding, and another question: can parish council apply for funding, or is it only highways authorities?
So the funding has been allocated to the highest tier authority, which is typically the highways authority, but in combined areas it's the combined authority. So that's where the funding is allocated to, but it is for the entire area underneath the combined authority or the relevant highest tier authority. So those are the only ones that can apply for the funding, but it is for all the authorities that sit underneath it. And it's a requirement of the LEVI funding that the higher tier authorities work with and consult the lower tier authorities to make sure that they understand the needs of the entire area. So point one. Point two is that the on-street residential charging scheme remains available this next year for sort of lower scale projects, so up to £200,000, and that remains open to the lower tier authorities as well.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. A little bit of a pushback on one of the responses you gave, Aaron, before, and it comes from the authority, and I can't imagine they're the only ones, but those who are already feel they're ahead of the game on this, and perhaps been encouraged to do so, feel as though they may be being punished for being ahead of the game. So, you know, question is the work they've done abortive? Will they have to do it again? It doesn't quite sound right that they're having to spend sort of time and any resources on doing the procurement again, which obviously adds costs and delay. So they're hoping they can make the case that they already have a sound approach in place. Is there anything more you've got to say about that?
So I think I'll sort of reiterate the point that I made earlier around how can you know that you're getting the best charging offer available for the subsidy on offer if you don't go to the market with it? I mean, what did you go to the market with before? What are the terms? What are you getting for the subsidy? And I guess if you've been out to procurement already, where is the funding for that procurement from? I mean, presumably you've already had funding for that. So that's not to say, as again, to reiterate the point I made earlier, if you have a proposition where you want to use an existing procurement part of the LEVI fund, and you can make a strong case for that, strong value for money case for that, we will consider it. But generally, the strong steer is to go out to procure with the funding available. We think testing the market on a case-by-case basis, we will all get a better proposition.
Okay, thanks, Harold. Is it possible to combine the AUKS and the LEVI funding opportunities, and procure a strategic partner?
So that they are separate funds with sort of, well, somewhat separate purposes. So the AUKS has been available for some time. We've changed the rules this year. I think you need to consider them as separate funds.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've got another question here about vehicle to grid. Is that within the scope of?
It's not an innovation fund. It's about commercializing the charge point sector and providing sort of a good local charging infrastructure. It's pretty early days for vehicle to grid. So we won't maximize the level of charging infrastructure available if we focus on that in the near term.
Okay, thank you. We've still got a question here, which is around those areas which have challenging issues in terms of connecting to the grid, and whether solar charging hubs be considered to alleviate this issue.
So there is, and just come back on the previous point as well, that there's flexibility within the fund for different technologies where they make sense as part of the overall project, which is about maximizing charging infrastructure. So if you are in a particular area with particularly challenging grid connections, bearing in mind that Ofgem have just changed the rules on that, so the connection costs ought to have come down really significantly post April. But if nevertheless, for a particular site which is really important to provide charging infrastructure, it is cheaper, it is sort of more cost effective to include solar as part of that project, we will consider that. But the key question behind all of this should be, how do I maximize charging infrastructure for my local area with the funding available? That's the exam question. And if solar is part of the answer to that, and it can be demonstrated that that's the case, then it can be within the scope of an application. But that's the exam question. How do we maximize charging infrastructure for local residents?
And just on that, the issue about the DNOs and the costs coming down significantly. Could you just say a little bit, because maybe not all of our attendees are familiar with it, but what was the rule change that Ofgem brought about? So
without getting into sort of technical detail, not least because I'm not all over with technical detail myself, the proportion of the costs of upgrading charging infrastructure used to be very heavily loaded to the latest connectee asking for the increased power. Now much more of it will be socialized across the wider area. Therefore, when you request a new connection, you should be paying a lower proportion of the cost of that connection where it requires an increase in capacity. And we can perhaps come back on this sort of Q&A if people do want to get into the technical detail of that.
So another question here, what is the position on passive infrastructure? So many terrace areas of parking challenges. We would like to put a couple of bays in each location and only install more bays as take-up of EVs increases to save ongoing O&M overheads and management costs and back office costs and upfront capital.
Yeah, so again, passive infrastructure is within scope of the LEVI fund. Again, it's if it makes sense for the overall strategy, so it's cheaper to do it, and you know, if you want to provide passive infrastructure for the whole street and put a few charge points in and have a plan whereby more charge points go in over time as demand increases, absolutely, that's certainly within scope of the fund, and it's good to be thinking ahead like that.
Okay, right. Is quite a specific one, but probably not, probably faced by some other areas as well. So we've been looking at increasing EVCP, the charge point network in rural areas, using parish council and other community accessible car parks. However, there is some concern of the commerciality of these sites, i.e. use over cost, which make the commercial sector twitchy in terms of investment. We appreciate the 60-40 rule might ameliorate these concerns, but will the levy fund go further than to the 60% position?
So the purpose of the LEVI fund is not to go with a maximum of this or a minimum of that. If there is a competitive procurement, you are testing the market and you are seeing what the market will bear. So that's what we like to see. And if you know, it is naturally the case that some projects are in certain areas are going to cost more, they're going to need to be subsidized at a higher level than others. So this is all about testing the market, and if a higher proportion of subsidy is required and that's demonstrated through a competitive procurement, then fair enough. There are no set limits for the LEVI fund, upper or lower, in terms of proportion of funding, other than we won't be 100% subsidizing anything. We do want to leverage and test the market.
Okay, it's very helpful, Aaron. Thank you. I think here a question for Hugh and or Joanna. So, in the expressions of interest, what level of authority should we seek to provide evidence and evidence for? Should that be provide letters of support or evidence of contact with second-tier authorities? So what's that level of evidence that's needed?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, it's letters of support really. So we just need to see that the constituent authorities within the sort of tier 1 authorities are looking to collaborate and looking to contribute to LEVI bids. So yeah, as Aaron said, the funding is allocated and the applications are completed by the tier 1 authorities. But yeah, we do need to see that support within the entirety of the tier 1. So, you know, where there are situations whereby I don't know, sort of aligning strategies, that might come into it. But yeah, absolutely, we want sort of letters of support within expressions of interest, and that could be something as simple as an email, sort of, you know, looking at or signed off by the appropriate officer saying, yes, we support this project, we all need to contribute to the overall project of our allocated LEVI funding. So that's probably the level of detail you'd need to go into there. And, you know, just while we're on the point of collaboration, it's not just within the tier 1s, we're looking for collaboration between tier 2 authorities. We're absolutely encouraging collaboration between tier 1s. So neighboring tier 1 authorities, you know, if you can bundle your allocations together, ultimately you've got more to go out to market with and you can leverage more private investment. So absolutely encourage collaboration where possible across tier 1s too.
Brilliant. So the when we've talked about in the application guidance talks about value for money, people are asking, is that shorthand for the cheapest or quality materials be used, or to ensure better levels and longevity of service?
So absolutely not the former. And value for money means value for money. So value for money for taxpayers, for local residents, for all of us. It's about making sure that we get a good deal from the CPOs, fundamentally. So good deal for local residents. So and again, there's flexibility within the fund on the kind of charge points in the particular areas that that local authorities are looking to deploy. What you want to see is competitive procurement. It is, again, I'd refer again to the heads of terms where we set out how we think we can effectively leverage that funding and protect residents and local authority interests into the long term.
Thank you. Just a question here. It says some districts and boroughs are being pressured by members just to just get some charge points. Therefore, they're looking at fully funded offers from CPOs and orcs and through orcs. The issue here is that they are giving up their better sites and thus diluting their levy offering to maximize scale and offering. So what's your advice? And Matthew, I don't know whether you've seen sort of similar pressures in your neck of the woods, whether you've got any advice as well. So I don't know who wants to go first.
Happy to go first if you want. Yeah, so I think along with most local authorities, we've had a lot of CPOs who have been knocking on our door, coming from every possible direction at parish, district, borough and county, trying to get concessions in some way or the other. We've held back from doing that in Suffolk at the moment, but we are looking at it, but we want to do it in a structured way, which is done with the districts and boroughs. And I think, you know, for us, we work really well in partnership. So we're having that conversation as best we can together, because otherwise we don't want to be, what's the right word, probably taken for a ride. Is that right in terms of EV infrastructure on this? And I think Aaron or Hugh talked about the longevity of contracts, you know, and people are saying to us, well, we want it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. What does that really mean? Are we happy for that? And I think there's a political decision to be taken there as well. So again, as officers, we might have a view about what's the best. On the other hand, we might have a political view which is different, and we may also have different views in the different districts and boroughs within our constituent sort of tier 1 geographical areas about what they're happy to do. So we may find, for example, you know, a borough might want to go for a commercial joint venture option, whereas somebody else might say, no, just put it in. But yeah, to sell our assets cheap is a really bad idea. So I sort of echo really Aaron's view of trying to leverage in as much as possible at the right time, rather than going in, I'm not saying too early, but you've got to go in at the right time when you understand your needs. You've got to have that EV strategy in place. You've got to have that conversation with districts and boroughs. You've got to have that conversation with parishes as well. And you've got to get a customer view. And also you've got to have those predictions and profiles of what's there as well.
Aaron, do you want to add anything, or has it been said?
I think I made the point around be aware of cherry picking earlier, so sort of selling off effectively the commercial sites potentially cheaply if you're not putting it to the market, doing a side deal with a CPO, and then leaving yourself with areas that would then need to be more heavily subsidized. I think the other point is that we shouldn't be afraid of longer term contracts. This is infrastructure investment, and it is understandable and right that the private sector will need to recoup its investment if we want them to invest, and that will take time. So in our heads of terms, which again I strongly urge you to have a look at the heads of terms, a lot of work went into that from a lot of experts. The recommended time frame for that is 15 years, so quite a long time, but I don't think we should be afraid of long-term contracts if they're good contracts. So again, we thought about tariff levels, we thought about maintenance, we thought about KPIs. A lot of thought has gone into those. So please do take a look at them and think about those when you're going out to procurement.
Thanks, Aaron. And here's one also looking to get value for money. For new charge points in car parks, is there the possibility to combine a tender for new upgraded pay and display machines, so there is one system which will help reduce clutter as well?
Again, the big question here, it's about charge points. So if you can make a case that upgrading some pay and display machines leads to a better overall value for money proposition, you can get more charge points. But I think we generally need to think bigger than that.
Is there any support to help lower tier, i.e. districts and boroughs, collaborate with tier 1 authorities, as the tier 1 seem to have limited capacity to do this?
Yeah, I can come in here. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the support body, that's what we're here for. So Energy Saving Trust within our team particularly, and our local government support programs, we've got a wealth of experience with local authority engagement. So anywhere where there are difficulties in collaborating or communicating with tier one authorities, then please let us know. That's what we're here for. We're here to help and support in creating those conversations, starting those conversations, looking at different ways in which you can collaborate, different types of projects. That's the thing. Within our team in particular, we've distributed ourselves regionally alongside our local government support program to ensure that we've got kind of familiar and consistent points of contact throughout spending periods and beyond that. So yeah, I think in terms of support, definitely get in touch. There's the LEVI at est.org.uk is the best and first place that you should come for that support. And we're super happy to help out at any point.
Okay, brilliant. A question perhaps, Matthew, for yourself, but here it is. From an enforcement point of view, are most on-street points accompanied by dedicated bays? If they are not accompanied by bays, how do you stop non-electric vehicles parking next to charging points? And do Suffolk enforce vehicles that are connected to points but not charging? Do you put any time limits on, for example, on the street through the day, etc.? What's your experience of managing that, Matthew?
How many charging points have you got along a street will affect some of these decisions. I nearly parked in a car park up in Durham the other week until I realised that after 2 hours I was going to be charged for £5 an hour for charging. So I sort of decided that probably wasn't the best. The enforcement side, I'll give you an example for one of our districts. They're putting charging points into a car park. They're really concerned because they picked some really good places for the charging points, but they're worried about losing income of charging points that aren't going to be used because the level of uptake of EVs is not sufficient. So how they enforce that is very much their choice. They can enforce it really tough. And any ICE car that's in a EV charge point, they can put a fixed penalty notice on if they want to, or they can just see how it goes. So enforcement is not black and white. And I think you'd need to look at the particular situation. I know I've said this before, to see how it's best fixes a problem if there is a problem, rather than looking for a problem before there is. Largely, I think dedicated bays for a charge point is the right way to go. As time goes by, as there's an increase in charge points, I think it's maybe less of an issue. But I think you just need to understand where we are now and where we might be in a year's time. 3,000 charge points in Suffolk by 2030 is very different from the 400 we have now. And how we enforce it might be very different. So yeah, just be cautious.
Okay, great. Just a quick question here. We're not far off being out of time, but I can get these in. So I think, Aaron, something you mentioned before, when you say go out to the market with the fund available, to be clear, are you suggesting the entirety of the capital funding allocation? In their case, it's 1.3 million, or what is it that you meant? Was it the entire amount, or was it part?
But potentially, I mean, it depends on the local authority strategy. So we've seen some local authorities are intending to go out for on street, for example, as sort of one package of support, and for another in some sort of fast chargers in car parks, another tender. So there are lots of, there's no one right way of doing this, and we're not trying to tell local authorities that there is a one right way. So just to emphasize, lots of flexibility. But potentially it might make sense in one local authority to go out with their full subsidy and tender on that basis. So flexible again. And again, talk to the support body about this. There's lots of expertise, and we don't want the applications to come in as a surprise in November or earlier. They should be the basis of a sort of ongoing conversation between the support body and the local authority to really help make those applications really strong as they can be.
Okay, so just the last sort of few minutes. I don't know whether you've got any sort of I've had a look at the questions, and I think we've answered probably most of them, if not all, and thank you for doing that. But are there any final sort of words of wisdom anybody wants to impart?
I think for me, just sort of moving on from the last point, I think I'd really like us to all see this as a bit of a partnership proposition. So central government, local government, the support body, and local authorities working together. I think we all have the same goals here to ensure really good charging infrastructure and maximizing how far we can take the funding available. So we should all see this as a big collaboration exercise and a learning exercise. So we all have a lot to learn in this space, and I think we can really help each other by sharing best practice and talking to each other.
Anything else anybody wants to add?
Yeah, I think from an application perspective, which is what we're trying to get across here, within expressions of interest, just try to be as clear as possible and articulate your points, and around your EV strategies, things like that. Even if you don't have one, when you're planning to go to one, the process of doing that, it will really help in the long run for us to kind of determine readiness and which tranche you're actually in. There was a question earlier about are some local authorities who may be in tranche 2 but also could be in tranche 1. That will really help us as the support body. So yeah, do be as clear as you can in expressions of interest. And yeah, I just really looking forward to seeing some of these projects come in and starting to get some tangible charge points in the ground. So yeah, it's a really exciting time for us and for everyone involved.
Thank you. Matthew, anything you want to add?
Only, I think our experience, we've just taken on 2 staff members to work on the EV stuff. We really think it's important getting the support of the Hughes team. Energy Saving Trusts have been fabulous for us. They come and talk to us. They come and talk to our districts and boroughs. Brilliant. The other thing with our 2 members of the team, they haven't had a lot of EV experience. There's not a lot of EV people out there. So we're just getting them to soak themselves in the EV world so they understand it inside and out. Because I think they have to understand the problems, the issues, the challenges, the benefits, and all those things. So invest in your staff so they know what they're talking about, and that networking really important. And again, the road shows, again, a plug for Hugh and his team. They are so useful, Hugh, in terms of the conversation over coffee, the conversation around a table. Really helpful. So yeah, invest in the staff, make sure they get out there and talk to people and network.
Okay, brilliant. That's some fantastic advice there. Look, we're about to come to the end now, and before I wrap up, we will be making slides available on our website. There will also be a survey going out, just a quick questionnaire. Really appreciate if as many people can complete it as possible. Just asking for your views on this webinar, but also ideas for future ones. So hopefully you can complete that. And I'll be talking to Hugh and his team just around the issues around if there's any questions that remain unanswered. I'm sure they've been capturing them, and we'll also be sharing on any unanswered questions so they can pick them up in a future FAQ, which I think you're planning on FAQ on your own website as well. Is that right, Hugh? Yeah. Okay. That's great. And we hope to have the recording available as soon as possible as well. So without further ado, just want to thank all the panelists. Aaron, Hugh, Matthew, Joanna, and our events team as well, and my colleague Simon for their support in making today happen, and for all the attendees for your sort of interaction on all your questions as well, and for your interest. So thank you and goodbye, and have a great afternoon and a really brilliant weekend.